This webinar is going to cover the 5 questions for choosing a type of program. Oftentimes, candidates are maniacally focused on whether or not they can get in and don't spend enough time thinking about which exact program type, i.e. online, in-person, hybrid, part-time, full-time, etc. They don't spend enough time thinking of those issues when they're making a choice as to which kind of program to target. They spend too much time thinking about, can I get in? What are my peers looking at? Where are my peers going? And not enough time focused on, does a particular program make sense for them? Let's look at the kinds of options up front. So firstly, you need to think about the delivery format. So you've got 3 main types of programs which are delivered today. And it's interesting in the sense that the last one is a pretty new phenomenon. You've got in-person, that's your typical program. You're showing up to class, you're in a lecture hall, you're interacting with other classmates and professors in a physical environment with them. Then you've got strictly online, where you're typically logging in a particular time of day and you are basically observing a video lecture, participating in it, using online tools often, or you're just watching the curriculum, watching the lecture itself. And then you've got a hybrid. And the hybrid, as I mentioned before, is the new format where you typically are on campus for a couple of weeks in a year, and you do most of the lessons at home. So this is the kind of program format which enables a school to offer the advantages where candidates continue working, candidates cannot be put out by having to move to a new location. So from a school's perspective, they can bring in more non-local candidates, but it also offers the positive environment of letting candidates network in person and build those relationships in person, which is hard to beat, hard to replicate when you're doing it online. It is fairly new and requires a certain kind of technological and organizational components such that most schools are not yet offering it, but we do believe in the future, over the next several years, you'll find an increasing percentage and number of schools offering this hybrid fashion. There's also a delineation between the time commitment. So you've got 3 different kinds of programs. Full-time, which is where you're doing this during the business hours. This is effectively in replacement of your job. You've got part-time, where you're typically doing an evening component, or you're doing a weekend component. It enables you to stay working. And you've got executive, which is typically a part-time program, but it's geared towards candidates who are mid-level career applicants. These are candidates in the business world. You may have, 8 to 15 years of experience. These are people in other fields like healthcare, et cetera, who typically have an amount of work experience which is not an entry level. They're typically mid-level executives in their industry, whether that's entertainment, whether it's healthcare, whether it's business, and they're looking to get a graduate degree to advance in their careers. They don't want to give up the position that they've worked so many years to obtain, nor the salary. The first question you have to ask yourself, the first point of emphasis is, do you have a job that you love? If you do have a job that you love, it often doesn't make sense to go full-time. You may be in a job that took you a long time to obtain, or it's highly coveted. And for you to essentially walk away from that job can effectively decelerate your career. You may be in a really hot company. I'm thinking today of companies like Uber and Slack, a lot of the companies that are looking to go public. You may not want to walk away from that kind of company. It may not make sense for you. For people that are seeking MBAs, if you're advanced in your career and the company will pay for it, you may need to think about an executive MBA. All right, this is a real consideration. A lot of times candidates spend so much time thinking, man, I'd be so excited to be on campus in X, Y, and Z location, be in a program, but they don't think about, what am I walking away from? What's the opportunity cost to going and studying at this kind of school or type of program, and leaving this job that I really care about, that is really a perfect fit. So you do have to take that into account whenever you make a decision to go to school. Your best options, if you have a job that you love, are to go part-time. Again, that's going evening and weekends, so enables you to work. Typically, you do have to get some kind of buy-in if you have a demanding job, because it's not necessarily easy for you to leave your job at 4 or 5 every day or a couple days a week. So you do have to get some buy-in, but typically you can work around that, and it does enable you to stay working. Going online, which typically doesn't require any kind of compromise from your job. You often can even take classes while you're at your job. A lot of times your bosses may not care because you're still going to be in the office and you're just going to continue working after you've done the class. Or an executive. And again, executive is when typically you are sent by your firm or by your organization to get a degree, and it's often subsidized. So at the very least, even if it's not subsidized, it does enable you to stay working, and it does compel you to get the sign off from your company or from your organization, such that they will clear out any kind of roadblocks that would enable you, which would dissuade you or not permit you to basically do well in your job, as well as pursue an academic degree. The next question you have to think about is, do you have expenses that require employment? Do you need to stay working in order to pay for real expenses? What are those typical expenses? Well, it could be expenses like a mortgage. It could be expenses like obviously childcare. Could be expense like taking care of a loved one, potentially a parent. Um, you know, the increasing percentage of students that are going to college as well as graduate school are working adults. And working adults tend to have to adult. And that means handling your business, taking care of a lot of expenses that you may not be thinking about. If you're a 17, 18-year old, or maybe even a 23-year-old, 24-year-old that's looking to go to graduate school. So even if you love your job, going to school may not be, even if you don't like your job, rather, going to school may not be feasible, right? Of course, you're probably going to graduate school to change your employment. That doesn't necessarily mean that you can change your employment before you have the upside of that degree. You may have to stay working. You may also look and say, look, I'm 20,000, I'm 50,000, I'm $100,000 in debt already, maybe for my mortgage or maybe for my undergraduate career, such that assuming new debt may not be acceptable to you personally. It may delay you from life events, potentially like getting married or getting that mortgage. To go from $20,000 in debt to $100,000, $150,000 in debt may just be untenable for you, right? And the other thing you have to realize is when you start thinking about taking on debt, that really means you have to have a higher scrutiny and pay closer attention to what the return on investment is for a particular graduate degree. It may not make sense for you to get that graduate degree in education or in psychology or in music, because you may not see the salary increase which warrants you being able to take on that kind of debt. So you really have to think about that. The other issue is that not every program, again, I don't mean program school to school, I mean type of program. Not every program has robust financial aid, right? So you may find that a particular kind of program um, may not be offering you financial aid. They just may not have that kind of money. So you need to think about whether or not it makes sense to actually leave your job. And then, pursuing graduate school full time may not be feasible. If you have kids, for example, if you're a single parent, you may not be able to basically take that time pursue graduate school because you may have to work, or potentially maybe you're in an area where the programs are not good, and or you live far away from a particular program, you can't afford that time potentially to drive to a program, and maybe they're not offering an online component. So your desire to getting a graduate degree may not fit, may not be symbiotic with your ability to actually pursue this degree full time, because you've got expenses which are real. If you have expenses which are things which are sort of high, require a lot of attention, and are not things you can put aside and just sort of say, I'm just going to go to school, your best options are probably online, some kind of hybrid of online and in person. Again, you go to campus, maybe for a couple of weeks a year, but you don't necessarily stay on campus, for the full sort of 50 weeks that it takes potentially to finish a degree. Potentially looking at a part-time option, again, doing it evening, night, or executive. These are typically the best options if you need to stay working. One of the things which candidates often don't think about when they're looking at school is how quickly do they need to finish their degree? Oftentimes, there are restrictions on the amount of time you can spend in school, potentially for the reasons I mentioned, but also for reasons like you might be burned out, or you might need to get that next step in employment in order to get that higher salary. So you may have a limited time to finish your degree. Um, this is something which a lot of candidates don't necessarily focus on in graduate school or in college, because I think I'm going to school for 4 years, maybe 3 years if they're working a little bit quicker. But once they are looking at going to graduate school, real life creeps in and they realize I have to get this done fairly quickly. You also may be in a position where, you may be in a company or organization where you're doing really well at your current level, but if you want to assume the next level professionally, you may need that graduate degree. Well, maybe your firm's not going to wait for you to take 3 to 4 years to finish it. That position will not be there. You have a peer potentially that could take that job. So you may need to finish that degree quickly. You may not have the luxury of taking a lot of time. If that's the case, your best option is really to go full time. I was going to say inevitably, it may not be inevitably, but it's really highly likely that you may need to just get in there, get that degree quickly, and get out. Typically, doing a degree full time will cut down the amount of time you need to do it by sometimes 30 to 50%. And if you do it part time, executive, or even online, you may find that online you may think, okay, well, online is great. I can just basically finish in the same period of time. That may be what the school promises, but you may find that an online course is not offered every semester. So in fact, even though you sign up online thinking, let's say that grad degree is going to take 3 years, if a particular class or two that are mandatory are not going to be offered when you're free, you're free to take it, when you've got that time in your schedule, you may find that you have to wait and be delayed in graduating. This happens all the time. So full time is your best option if you need to finish that degree quickly. The next question, which is typically the first question people think of, but not, I would say, I would offer in the correct way, is how important is the prestige of a degree? Most people sort of say, look, if I'm getting a graduate degree, I want a degree that has a name. Well, the challenge is that if you want a degree that has a name, that has a brand, you may find that that school does not offer that degree in any other way than a full-time basis. Okay. You may need to go full-time in person to get that particular kind of degree, or get that particular, be engaged on that particular kind of program. So you've got to think about it. And then you have for some industries and jobs, right? The degree may really dictate the quality of the initial career opportunities you assume. Now, I'm one of those people that thinks that the cream rises to the top, and the name behind a degree isn't necessarily as important as the person. But the reality is, when you start out initially, you may not have that runway to kind of get in the right industry. So you may find that if you don't have the right brand of a degree, it may be hard to get that job at the National Institute of Health. It may be hard to get that job, curating at some kind of museum. It'd be hard to get that job working at Google or working at Goldman Sachs. They may be thinking, no, no, no. I want someone from a particular kind, with a particular kind of degree, a particular kind of school behind it. And that could be a problem for you if you're looking to sort of do an online program because you don't have the time to sort of go full time. You may want to do an online program, for example, at Columbia, get a master's in analytics, let's say. Well, what if Columbia doesn't offer that program online? It's only an in-person program. That's something you have to tangle and reckon with, okay? So part of this analysis is understanding what your career options are, but it's also understanding who you are personally, right? Are you someone that's seeking a graduate degree largely for the flexibility or the optionality, i.e., you don't know exactly what you want to do? Or do you have a particular laser-like focus on a particular goal where you know that, look, if I want to get into X, Y, and Z industry, if I want to get that job at MasterCard doing data analytics, I need a particular kind of degree, let's say in the New York City area where I am, such that I have to go to one of these schools. You have to know who you are, okay? You have to know what you want, and you also should be aware of the career options. If that's the case where you need a particular prestige of a degree, your best option is a full-time program. Most schools, most programs um, are offered, full-time for 90 to 100%. When you start going to online, you start going to hybrid, you start going to executive, that's when you see the drop off. You may see, only potentially 20% of the programs that you're interested in offering a degree, they may only 20% may offer it online, right? So that really cuts down your options. If you're saying, I want to get a graduate degree, again, that degree, let's say in public policy, and I want to go to a top 10 school, you may look at the public policy programs at MPP and realize that, man, only three of the top 10 schools offer this online program. Well, that's pretty dangerous to then say I'm only going to apply to those top three. And they may not be the three that make sense for you for a number of reasons: location, cost, where they place their alumni, et cetera. So you've got to be really clear and to a certain extent begin to prioritize these things. That's kind of my next point, which I want to get to, right? Which is, how do you decide? A lot of times you'll have competing interests. You may say, look, I want to not go in debt, but I also want to go to the most prestigious program I can. Well, you may find that, let's say if you're getting potentially like an MBA, you may find that's a challenge. If you want to go to a top 10 program, but you want to do it, let's say part time, I can tell you in the top 10, there might be 4 to 5 schools. You're literally cutting off half the schools to basically, if you want to go part time. You're not going to be able to go to Harvard. You're not going to be able to go to Columbia. You're not going to go to Wharton. You can go to NYU, right? But you're cutting out a lot of schools. So you have to basically think about what your career needs. Are you looking for a degree that's a polish up degree? Look, I just need this degree just to kind of polish myself a little bit, show my employer, my intended employer, that I have this degree, that I checked off the box, that I put my time in and sacrifice. Are you someone that needs a robust network? Are you trying to, potentially launch a company? Are you trying to sort of get into a particular industry that's really hard to get into? Let's say museum curation, for example, where you're going to need to meet a lot of people in the field, and that degree is going to be an amazing and really important segue in order to do so. Do you need a degree that's transferable, right? So do you want to, and this kind of comes to the last point, do you want to go work in Europe? Do you want to go work in Africa? Do you need a degree that's recognized in those places? Are you trying to sort of move industries where you need a particular kind of degree such that you need a particular kind of program? So you've got to really think about what you want in your career. And one of the things you're going to constantly hear mentioned and a lot of the resources in our curriculum that we've curated and built for you is you have to have your own compass internally before you sort of look and start making decisions externally. You can't let the tail wag the dog and look at what are all the options out here versus saying, what do I need personally? And then go out and sort of say, what are the different kinds of programs and different kinds of degrees, as an example, which allow me to achieve my goals and satisfy my needs. If you're like most candidates, often more than one type of program applies to you, right? So you may say, look, again, using that example, I really want to go online because I want to stay working, but I really want to finish quickly. So you may be torn in different directions. That's totally normal. A lot of us go through it. I went through it myself. What you need to do is, per the last slide, is determine what are your priorities. So there's some things that are necessary to have, and there's some things on your wish list. So in the example I gave, is basically finishing quickly Is that a nice to have or is that a must have? Maybe it's a nice to have, and maybe the prestige of the degree or the program is actually necessary, or maybe it's the flip, but you have to go through and really do your own kind of self-analysis and figure out what are your priorities, right? You also have to recognize that this is not just your decision alone, meaning you've got programs and admissions committees which are also evaluating you. It's a marriage. So you may want something. You may be that person that's got, for example, 15 years of experience who's looking to basically apply to school. A school may say, we want you in our executive program. You're a better fit for our executive program. You're too old, you're too mature, you're too advanced to really network with your peers that are 24, 25, 26. So you have to understand that the schools and the admissions committees have a say in this also. And they need to be clear about your options, right? So this is not your only, it's not only your decision. You need to think about, okay, what are my true options for for what's out there. And I'll give you an example. So a couple of years ago, we worked with a candidate that was looking at a graduate MBA degree as well as data analytics, decided to get an MBA degree. And he was about 34 years old. He knew that he wanted to interact with his peers. He wanted to build a really robust network with his peers. And he also did not want to pay a huge amount. Well, when he applied to school, he applied for a full-time program at a very prestigious university. That university intercepted his application, called him one day and said, hey, we want you to come in and talk to us. He went in to talk to them. And, in a full surprise, they said, look, you are not a good fit for a full-time program. You're a better fit for our executive program. And they told him that if you want to be considered to enter our university, our graduate school, you have to apply as an executive, right? And he realized that the school looked at him as a 34-year-old with 10 to 12 plus years of experience. They viewed him as an executive type MBA candidate as opposed to a full-time candidate which had 3 to 5 years of experience. And these were people that were typically in the full-time program that were 24 through 26 years, 27 years old. So he had not done that calculus and thought, it's not just my own priorities, it's actually what the school's looking for. It's their priorities as well. Thankfully, he then took a step back and said, well, I still want what I want. I still want to go full time. And he sat back and ascertained his options and realized, you know what? There's another good school that's pretty close by, another top level school that I'm going to attend. He ended up going to a really high level school, the same caliber. We're talking about schools in sort of the Columbia, Stanford, Chicago, Northwestern, Harvard type level. He went to another school in the same caliber and got what he wanted, right? He convinced them to basically accept him for the full-time program. He did that partially based on the knowledge of how they would view him. So he rewrote his application to basically skew it towards more, so like he needed to network with people that were a little less advanced in their careers. And he also was very clear about his priorities as well. So that's hopefully a good example for you of how you need to take these things into account. I hope you found this helpful. I hope you understand that when you think about program types, you have to ask yourself some really personal questions and do that analysis up front, and realize also that it's not just your own decision, it's also the decision of the admissions committee.
Admit me, never apply alone.